Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out and watching this. And I'm Brian Ferguson, teacher slash animator in residence here at DePaul. And I am introducing to you Aliki Theofilopoulos.
All right, I'm going to get some of this now.
Oh, yeah. So while you're pouring that,
yes.
My first question to you will be, how did you first decide this is the kind of thing you wanted to do? What was the first thing that made you think you'd like to do this? What show did you see that you loved?
I just know that, well, I always loved drawing. So that was one thing. And then I just loved watching cartoons. And I especially loved Looney Tunes cartoons. I just thought they were so insane. Anything could happen. They were so funny. The facial expressions, the hijinks, just the quick snappiness of it all. And I just absolutely loved watching Looney Tunes cartoons. And I really loved watching all cartoons. I mean, at the time, there were a lot of reruns of older cartoons. So I was watching a lot of Popeye and Tex Avery cartoons, like Droopy and Tom and Jerry, just all those old cartoons that were played at the time. I just absolutely loved them. And I also loved the Disney films. So while these cartoons were so funny and just cracked me up and were so crazy, I loved that the Disney films made me really feel something. They were just so beautiful and emotional, and it was kind of represented. Now I can look back and know that it represented two parts of myself, but those were the things that kind of drew me into wanting to become an animator one day.
Pretty cool. Okay, so I remember we were talking about this earlier, but I want to bring it up again. The first Disney movie that you saw and how it really hit you.
Well, I have a very vivid memory of watching Dumbo, and when it got to the scene, the baby mine sequence, where have most of you seen Dumbo, I hope? Okay. Sometimes you don't know. But the baby mine sequence where Dumbo's mom is cradling him in his trunk. Now, I loved the animals. I loved the cartooniness of the movie. I loved Pink Elephants on Parade. It was cool and kind of scary. But that beautiful moment where Dumbo's mom is cradling him in her trunk, I was fighting tears, and I just felt like I want to make people feel like this. And I remember that so clearly. And that was kind of the real moment that made me say I want to do this too.
A supervillain would tear up watching that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Pretty cool. So then that sort of sealed your interest in it. When did you start drawing? Because I remember. All right. So for those of you that might not know, we first met when she came into Disney as a trainee. You were as a trainee, right? And they put us together. She was my trainee, and she was astonishingly talented at drawing. And so from that, I would say, all right. So how did you get that way?
Well, it's interesting because as we were talking earlier, I was really kind of an idiot kid growing up. I was unfocused. I would get into trouble. I was goofy. I was a ham. I was scared. I just was like, never really kind of just there. I was either like afraid or doing something for attention, or I was just all over the place. So I say I love drawing, but I wasn't very focused. It was only like later kind of in my high school years where I was like, okay, I really want to focus in. I really want to do this animation thing. Got into USC. At the time, there was not an animation major. There was just one animation class that I couldn't even get into until my senior year. So I majored in art, and there, the art was much more conceptual. And in fact, animation was like a dirty word. If I said I wanted to draw cartoons, the teachers would get mad at me. They'd be like, "Don't even talk about that. That's not art. Get that out of here. I don't want to." I literally had a teacher said, "I don't want to see anything that looks like this in my class," because I had something kind of cartoony. So I really, yeah, I really actually kind of drank the Kool-Aid a bit, where I got really into more conceptual abstract art. And it was great because it shaped a lot of my thinking. But when I graduated, I found out that everything I had learned couldn't directly open up any doors for me to get into animation. So I started taking classes. It was at the Union at the time. They were life drawing classes. And they were with teachers that had worked in the industry and taught life drawing in a way that was focused for just the kind of thinking and drawing that an animator needs to do. And for those of you who don't know, Glenn Vilppu was a really great teacher at the time. You can find a lot of his stuff online. I really, really connected to his classes because he met people where they were at and taught them individually. But the one thing that he noticed about me was that I was really good at gesture drawing. I didn't really like the 3-hour poses as much. I liked the kind of quicker drawing. But that's where I really found something within myself for expressing myself figuratively. And it's those drawings that I did during that time that got me into that Disney training program, because I'd never animated anything in my life. So it was my portfolio from those drawing classes that got me in. Yeah.
That is pretty cool, and it's so true too that the gestural drawings are the ones that really show the personality. Well, the funny thing though is that I know I've heard from people who teach sort of classical drawing, the ones who will focus on really long poses. They'll complain that the students ignore that gestural side. You know, like you come back to the drawing later and say, well, yes, it looks like the model, but what are they doing? What's the pose really doing? So, and I know from us talking earlier, you know, you like to see, you know, other than the finish in the drawing, the passion, the raw passion in it.
And it's something that comes up. I mean, you know, just as I was telling you, that a meeting I had today at work, you know, all these years later, there were 2 storyboards that were pitched to me, and one was much rougher and looser and had those gestural acting life drawings in there. And the second one was much more cleaner and neater, but everything was straight up and down. The acting was super boring because of it. It was all drawn on model and everything, but everybody was straight up and down. You know, the acting was just really stiff. And I was like, I have a lot of work waiting for me when I come in on Monday, because I have a lot of drawings to do on that one. So those early lessons of being in those life drawing classes are still so apropos to this day. And I think that as soon as I see those stiff boards, I know that that's missing from that person, that person hasn't taken the time to learn that.
So before we get too far away from your history, I'm sure everybody here would like to hear your process of like what you went through going from being a student at the union classes. Then it was Disney where you started? It was the first thing.
First thing was with you at Disney Features.
So, all right. So tell us your experience with that to the end of being at Disney, and then what happened after.
Well, so I had so I was at USC, and like I said, there was not an animation department, but they started a graduate program my senior year. And I like to talk about this because one thing that nobody can ever, and I know it sounds like I'm veering right now, but I promise it's related. One thing that nobody can ever give you is the drive to do this. You have to have that drive. You have to go out and get it. Nobody is going to just knock on your door and hand it to you. If you sit there waiting for something to happen, it's not going to happen. And that has happened for me over and over and over again, from the height of feature animation to the fall of it, which I got to watch it all, and over again, these ups and downs. I just started showing up to the graduate classroom and just making friends and meeting people. And they'd let me sit in the back and I would listen. And I made a friend who said he had an internship at a studio that's now defunct called Hanna-Barbera, where they made cartoons like the Flintstones and the Jetsons, really, really old cartoons even for me, but it was a very famous studio at the time. He had an internship there, and I begged him to connect me to someone so I could get an internship too. And so I ended up meeting with someone. I did get an internship there. I met a lot of TV greats that ended up really mattering later in my animation life. Like Gendy was developing Powerpuff Girls. Am I mixing them up? Or is he Dexter's Laboratory? But anyway, there were these greats at the time. The president was Fred Seibert, who started Frederator Cartoons, which is what did Adventure Time and all these big shows. It was all connected. I was there making photocopies and typing expense reports and running errands. I mean, to me, I was doing a very menial job, but I was meeting all these people. And I heard about the union classes, and so I took the union classes, and those portfolio drawings got me into that training program. My point is that pushing forward and being at the right place, but because I made myself be at the right place, really mattered. And so anyway, so then from the training program, after mentoring with Brian, I got hired onto Hercules and spent about 7 years working on the animation side. And it was an incredible learning time for me. I got to learn from greats like Brian and John Ripa and work with Glenn on Treasure Planet and meet these incredible people. But it was also a really sad time because as I was like 22, just coming up in my career, everything was collapsing at Disney Feature Animation at that moment. And I was watching all the older generations so upset and disappointed and disheartened. And I mean, people crying and upset. They didn't know how they were going to pay their kids' college tuitions. And I just watched all this happening. And two things. One is I knew I shouldn't try to be promoted into an animator. I was a rough in-betweener because all the new animators got let go of because their footage wasn't high enough. And I knew that I needed to increase my skill set. That if I hung around and waited for something to happen magically, it wasn't going to happen. So I signed up for classes, and I signed up to do the training in Maya. So I was taking storyboard classes again at a local school, and I did the Maya training because they were going to fizzle out the 2D department. And for me personally, and this is what I found out, that it was okay for me personally to decide that I didn't like Maya animation, and it wasn't right for me. It was right for a lot of other people, and it's still to this day right for a lot of people. But for me personally, that kind of more intuitive gesture drawing person, it just didn't feel right for me. But while I was taking these storyboard classes, I was like, oh, I'm still drawing. I'm still doing acting poses. And I realized the thing that I liked the most about animation was the storytelling, even more than just performance. So I had the option to either go with Eric Goldberg to a movie he was directing as his rough assistant.
Was that at Disney or at
Warner Brothers?
Warner Brothers. So that was Looney Tunes Back in Action,
Looney
right?
Tunes Back in Action, or a friend of mine that worked at Nickelodeon asked me to give him some drawings and said that he knew that the studio was looking for new talent. I handed him my life drawing portfolio, and he's like, "What is this?" I'm like, "It's my drawing portfolio." And he's like, "But who are you? What do you do? What do you think? What do you make? What do you draw?" And I was like, I have no idea. I've been supporting other people my whole career. I don't know who I am. And I sat there and I did a bunch of just random character designs and little doodles and ideas and everything. And he brought that over to Nickelodeon, and I ended up with having a meeting with them, and they offered me a position to be a storyboard assistant on a show called Chalk Zone. And I remember I didn't know what to do, and I called Eric Goldberg, and I was like, I don't know if I should stay in features and follow you, or if I should, go do this job. And he said, as of today, 2D animation is a dying art form. You should take the job in television. And I ran into him many years later, and he's like, did I lead you the right way? And I'm like, yes, thank you. Because that opened up a lot of doors for me, finding that I really liked storyboarding. I liked storytelling. Fred Seibert, who was the president of Hanna-Barbera, was at Nickelodeon because he had a deal with them where he was selling shows to Nickelodeon. I met him in the hallway. And I'm sorry I'm talking so much. There's so much has happened, but I feel like this is important. So I knew who he was. And again, I'd always been that really terrified girl. And I developed a rule for myself that if I was ever afraid to do something, that meant it was a signal that it was the exact thing I had to do. So I went up and I introduced myself to him. And he says he couldn't believe, everybody was so terrified of him. Nobody would ever talk to him, and he couldn't believe that this girl just beelined across the floor and introduced themselves to him. So he went and asked who I was and what I was doing, and then called me up and said, will you pitch a cartoon idea, which I had never done in my life. So I came up with a couple things, pitched it to him. I ended up, I went to a show called Johnny Test for a while, maybe some of you know. I worked on my pitches. I did my 2 shorts for Nickelodeon. They didn't get picked up for series, but they did air, and Dan Povenmire saw them. And Dan, creator of Phineas and Ferb with Swampy, was looking for artists that could not only storyboard, but could write. And he really liked my shorts, and he was like, this is a person who can write stories and storyboard. And he also was looking for female voices. He felt like the industry was so driven by male voices and male writers all the time, and he knew he was going to have female leads, and he wanted them to feel authentic. So he reached out to me and ended up hiring me onto Phineas and Ferb. So in Phineas, I was writing, storyboarding, wrote songs, did voices, just had the opportunity to do many different things. It really shaped a lot of who I am. I got to find out I was funny. I got to find out that that my voice mattered, and then just to rush through, like I ended up going into development at Disney on some of my own projects. And again, there's the ups and downs in this industry. There was a lot of disappointment with my projects not moving forward, but the right people liked them and offered me the opportunity to direct on Descendants. And I also directed a short for Frederator called Dr. Lollipop. You guys should watch it. It's really weird. And that ended up going to Annecy. So I was just getting this attention. And so Disney offered me the opportunity to direct Descendants Wicked World and then ultimately executive produce it. And they felt like, they said to me, we know we didn't move forward on your projects, but you showed us that you can handle a massive franchise because you've had to be in the room having meetings with very high-level people at our company, and you've been able to speak to them articulately, you've been able to defend your ideas, you've been able to take a vision and see it through, and we really need somebody to be able to do that with this project and work with our live-action group. So I did that, and then from there, I ended up going to DreamWorks to work on Harvey Girls Forever. I really wanted to do that because I wanted to do a cartoony show with female leads. I'd always wanted to do something cartoony. I got to do the Minnie Mouse, and that was that. It was like, people were talking to me saying, well, we can't get any good stories for Minnie, and I was like, why don't you take one of the Mickey stories and have it just put Minnie's name on it? Because all the stories, Minnie was a sidekick to Mickey. She wasn't driving anything. So I, was like, can I write this one and have her drive the story? And so I got to do that, and that was incredible. I also went to Annecy. So then DreamWorks, Harvey Girls Forever. From there, I'm trying to rush through this. I went to a show called Doug Unplugs, which was a preschool show for Apple, and it was a CG show, and I really wanted to do it, because I thought Apple would be really exciting. I don't know if it's turned out to be as exciting as I thought it would, but I really thought it was cool that Apple was starting a children's division, and I think it's hard with these streaming services for people to know about the shows, but it was a really sweet little show. So I did that, and then I went onto a show, this was during the pandemic, called Drop Diaries, which will be out next year, about 3 cute fairies. I guess that's all I can say about that. And then from there, I just started on Zombies, the ReAnimated Series, which is an offshoot from the live-action Zombies franchise on Disney, and Disney's gonna blow that up. It's gonna be amazing. It's looking incredible. So I'm really, really excited to work on Zombies. And I also have 2 of my own things back in development with Disney again. So I'm busy.
Amazing. That is, you know, hearing all this, I think one of the greatest lessons in all this is how you handle what could be looked on as failure more as a learning experience, and how you sort of flip that switch in your head to say, this is what I'm going to make out of this. I remember there was one time that you and I got together for lunch to catch up on stuff. This was after you had left Disney, and we were catching up. You left features. I think I'm not sure if you were back at Disney at that point. I don't remember exactly, but you were. One thing that you had said that really impressed me was how you know, you understood the culture at Disney, where, you know, you come into the studio, you go into your office and close the door, and then, you know, keep all the work that you're doing close to your chest until it's done and ready to show people, and then you kind of go, here, this is what I've done. And you completely turned that around by the time you and I were talking. So please tell me about
say a little bit more about how did I turn it around? I'm like, what's this awesome thing I did? I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, so you've gone so far beyond that now, I guess. But it really resonated with me. What you said is that you stopped doing that, like hiding what you were doing, and instead if you had an idea and it wasn't fully formed, you would put it out there for everybody to see.
Yes, okay, I know what you mean. So I always talk about in different talks that I do that my journey in my career and my story is also a journey of like just finding out who I am and just gaining a little bit of self-esteem. Because when I first started out, all I did is compared myself, as all artists do, to how awesome everybody else was. Oh, but that person does this, but that person does that. I could never da-da-da, and that person, I don't want to show anybody what I've done because it's stupid, it's not good, it's not drawn well, it's not perfect, it's not in Photoshop, it's not into, like, so many things that my head can just spin out, and then I would just end up hiding, that people wouldn't really know what I did. And it really was during Phineas where, like, we almost didn't have a choice, because at the time, we would put our storyboards up on the wall, and we would sit at a conference table late at night workshopping ideas, and everyone was just sitting there on these Post-it notes drawing new, funny, quick drawings, and they'd stick them on the wall. Fast, just really fast little scribbles. So I had to start doing that too, and the more I started like noticing, like, okay, well, these are kind of funny, and well, people like these. I mean, I remember one time I did this drawing, and Dan goes, I don't care if everything else is thrown away and we just keep that panel. And I didn't even understand that I had that in me until I started putting it out there. So the more I did that, the more I would force myself to do it, even to this day, where, you know, it's really easy for me to be like, oh, but this person has this amazing lens flare and this perfect painting. But I don't do that. What I do is what I do. And so I just started like forcing myself to put it out there, whether it's posting or put a funny drawing and stick it onto my desk. So somebody walked in my office, they saw it. In fact, the show that I have in development right now, 2 things. One, the first thing was a Post-it, and I stuck it on my desk. And Dan was in my office, and we were talking about something, and he interrupted himself, and he goes, wait a minute. Who is that? I want to know who this is. And I started telling him about the character. And then I thought, oh, Disney has these art shows. I'm going to put her in an art show. And I'm just going to put a little snippet about who she is, as if I'm pitching her in 4 panels. So I got a family photo frame. I put 4 little panels in it, and I just stuck it on the wall. And I was just at the art show with everybody, having a little snack, and this executive, this head of development at the time, came up to me and grabbed me by the arm and went, "Oh my God, you know, who is that? She's a effing star. You need to pitch her." So it's taken a while, but she's in development right now at the studio. So, you know, it really is important to just get over yourself and get your work out there.
Yeah, I just love that. What a great lesson for everybody here, right? So, okay, where can we go from there? So, all right. I'm sorry this is a little bit off topic now. Okay, it's way off topic.
Okay.
But as we were watching this stuff, there's some of the stuff that I hadn't seen before, and The Descendants is one of them. And I was thinking, okay, this is for TV, right? You know, CG for TV, and always whenever I see animation for TV, I'm thinking, you know, it's only got so much time, so much budget. It's going to be only so good. But the animation in that is incredible. The acting is actually really acting. It's not formula movement. So what can you tell us about that?
I'm so happy to hear you say that. The animation studio is called Prana, and they're in India. And I have to say, all my time at Disney, and that's where it's like nothing's wasted. It's not like, oh, you didn't become a 2D animator, guess you wasted 7 years. Like everything I learned, I got to bring into doing Descendants. And even though I don't think of myself as like how you were a supervising animator that took leads on characters and ran teams, I learned enough about Disney feature animation that I've gotten to bring that into the work I do for TV. So these animators were fantastic, but I did full-on handouts with them where they ended up filming me, and I would act things out. I would act them out on my phone and send them to them. And then also, and I do this to this day with my CG shows, they send the animation to me, and I have them put it in a program called Sync Sketch, where you can go frame by frame, and I do draw-overs over all the expressions, the timing, if there isn't enough weight, and all that kind of stuff. So I try to bring into what I learned drawing and in 2D animation into what happens in CG.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I had no idea. Holy cow, like, so that is so wonderful. You know so many aspects. Okay, this brings me to another thing. You know, there are so many disparate disciplines that you're bringing to this, and all of it is so useful. It's all right. How about this? It blows my mind that you are writing Emmy-nominated songs, and they're great. You know, when I watched them and heard them, I was thinking, it only makes sense. Like, what could have beaten this? You know, it was only nominated. You know, so. There's a question in that, isn't there?
How did I end up doing songs, or
well,
like where did the?
Well, tell me about. Yeah, okay, let's do that, because I would like to hear about each of those separate disciplines. How you know, like, so we see how you brought them all together and you're using them. How did you start with music? Like, was that something that you did growing up at the same time as you were drawing? Like you took piano lessons or singing or something like that?
I always say I'm just like a weird patchwork quilt of strange abilities. That like I was very musical growing up, and I took piano, but I didn't like it very much because again, like sitting in the chair and scales, and I just wasn't good about. I think I must have had like ADD as a child or something because I was very fidgety and unfocused. But so I could play by ear, and I was very musical, and I just love music. And I just like with my brother would goof around making up songs and just to make each other laugh. So on Phineas and Ferb, what I loved, and now it's been such a model for me, I try to run my shows the same way, is there was a lot of freedom. Where in feature animation, we didn't even know people in different departments. Like if you happen to wander into this one corner, you'd be like, who are the people here? Like we were kept so separated, and it makes sense for the way features are done. But Dan was so like, oh, if you have a song idea, why don't you try it? And I was doing Finadroids and Furbots, iBrobot it's called, and I was like, well, I have a song idea. Let me try it. And so I wrote Finadroids and Furbots. That was my first song. And he loved it and was like, yeah, this is the song. And I was like, so I can just think of a thing, do the thing, and then people like it, and then they end up on air, and then they're in Disneyland attractions, and people know the words. This is crazy. So that started, and again, then just building some confidence, and I just kept at it and just kept trying to write songs, or I would come up with ideas or lyrics, and then we would have a songwriting session together with a group of other writers that liked to do songs, and so just continue that wherever I could and through the years.
That is excellent. Okay, so that's the musical part of it. The humor. Now, there's something about your humor that I've always appreciated. Your timing is impeccable. The stuff that you come up with on the fly is just, it's so perfect. And it's so, what makes it so great for me is how it rings true. Like, it's something that's not just out of a formula, but it's something that really fits. And so, I don't know, on the one hand, like, I hear now about your parents being, as smart as they are, then I kind of go, okay, that's all making sense now. But were you that way right from the start, always like being funny?
Well, just with my brothers and my dad. My dad is really funny. My dad is insane. I mean, he's brilliant, research doctor. But he's really funny. He has a great sense of humor. I'm always so glad that my parents let me watch Looney Tunes cartoons, that they weren't like, you should be da-da-da. Like, so I think that it was just there. My brothers and I would goof off. But I didn't really understand, again, how funny I was until getting on a Phineas and Ferb. I knew I loved funny things and I loved funny people. Like, you're very funny and Panic was funny, and I wanted to be a part of that character because I liked that kind of humor, and the animation was so fun for me. And then, but on Phineas and Ferb is where I guess I gained the confidence to be funny out loud, I guess I would say, instead of in my head or quietly. And then I think that I learned how to structure it. Like, I learned how to take the humor or take the things I was thinking of that could be funny and put it into a form that could be communicated. It's the best way I could say it. And that's visually too, because with Phineas and Ferb, we weren't just sitting down writing our script. Sometimes if something was more dialogue heavy, I would take out a Word doc and write something down. Other times, I would just take out animation paper, draw a bunch of squares, and I would just draw out the scene first, and then I would write underneath. And that's how I would do my writing. So I would discover what would be funny about the scene as I was doing these little scribbles. And so just that process helped me become more familiar with humor and familiar with comedic timing. And, knowing how to just sit on something like Phineas and Ferb, I think, is really great with not trying to get out of something too quick. It'll just sit on something for a second, and just that becomes really funny. And stuff like that just timing started to become more natural. Yeah.
All right, and so I hear about all this stuff that, you come in with these ideas, people see these ideas that you've got, or, these things that you do, and they're impressed enough, and they say, "Oh, we're going to use this," or they bring you along and say, "All right, I want to use you to do such and such." It suddenly occurs to me that from the time that I started in the industry, and my experience was really mostly in one place, but I was always hearing about this glass ceiling for women, and I'm sure that you were kind of coming up against that yourself where we were together. And then now you were in these other places where it doesn't sound like that was there. Did you see it happen as a change in a place that you were, or was it sort of like you went from one place that had it to another place that didn't?
It's definitely been a process, and it definitely was very present. There's a really funny picture of, I think it's something with John. It was either Tarzan or Treasure Planet, where it was, I can't remember, but it's me and all this room full of guys and just me sitting there. And so it definitely.
Oh, John Musker?
No, John Ripa.
Oh, John Ripa,
yeah. it's, you know, I got my first, the training program was 1995. So I've witnessed a big change in our industry, but for a long time it was really, really freaking hard to break through. It was so hard. And, you know, there's another director, female director, Kat Good, and we came up together, and we were talking the other day about how we at that time really needed the guys that would support us, because there just weren't other women to support us. And people like Brian and John Ripa that were like, there was no like, she's a girl, or it just wasn't, or creepiness, because there are some people that were creepy, by the way. I won't name names, but so there was just, it was just purely like, I see your talent, I want to be here for you, I'm going to mentor you, and I'm going to help you, and that was so important through all those years. And when I got onto Phineas and Ferb, there was one other female board artist writer, and we used to say like, let's try to break the glass ceiling so then we can be here for, like, we used to be afraid because we wanted to direct and we couldn't become directors. There were no directors at the studio that were female. And we used to say, well, maybe we won't end up getting to do it, but let's try to pave the way for the other girls coming up. Maybe they'll be able to do it. Like, that's how we used to feel, because it was that hard. I was at Disney all that time talking about wanting to be a director, and I didn't get to direct until I went outside and did Dr. Lollipop, and I had to ask permission to do that. And I was lucky that Fred Seibert, he greenlit the short that I did. It was called Girls on the Go, and it was all girl characters. And at that time, I'm telling you, he really believed in that short. He would take me around to studios to pitch it as a series, and everybody would say, girls don't watch cartoons, we don't do female leads, we don't do a show with girls, over and over again. And he would say, well, let's be the first people to do it. And they wouldn't. I mean, this is the guy that's done so many big shows. So I did Dr. Lollipop. He, you know, was down to give me that opportunity. Then with doing all the development I did at Disney, then they gave me that opportunity to direct Descendants, which was, I mean, it made sense. It was an all-female cast. So it's taken some time. Now I can say, well, first of all, when I went to DreamWorks, I have to give it up because there were a lot more females in high positions there. The head of the studio, Margie Cohn, like, there were a lot of high-level female executives, so I think they were trying to give up opportunities to other women. Now it's changed a lot. There are a lot of women in high-level positions, and I shouldn't say that, on their way to getting into high-level positions. There are a lot of female storyboard artists. There's starting to be some female directors, and these are the future showrunners. Like, they might not be showrunning yet, but they're going to be, because that's the path. So yeah.
So cool.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there thinking how much it has changed from, you know, like, there's still, I know that it's still an issue, but it is so much less an issue than, like, I mean, it's so much less now for what I see than when I was first in it. And I remember having somebody else before you that was not a trainee, but was in the cleanup department, but wanted to try, actually a couple of people that wanted to try animation. So I was trying to help them too. And it was oddly a woman that was preventing them from stepping over to animation. I don't think it was a bad, or like, you know, I don't think that her motivation was to hold somebody back. It was more like they were really good and she didn't want to lose them from her, you know, working for her. But all right.
Well, now now I think the focus is trying to represent more voices too, as far as like diversity and equity and inclusion. And you know, I feel like I look and I go, God, it was so hard to get a woman's voice out there. It took so long, and now we're in a time where we're like, okay, we're starting to do that. Let's look at the other voices that have not been represented, and let's start bringing those voices in too. And I have to say, like, on our show right now, our writers' room has an incredible cross section of voices in it. I'm so proud, because I mean, the authenticity that's coming out of it, and this group is really smart, really talented, really freaking funny. But having characters that are also diverse in the Zombies franchise, we get to have the voices be correct and true too, which is super exciting.
Something else I love that you have made a point of as well is that wanting to make strong female characters, and you were saying that doesn't mean, you know, physically strong sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's more like, you know, a female that is leading the story, right?
Yeah, so one thing that with my mission that I wanted to create shows that had strong female leads is there was a time especially where I just felt like that always meant that the strong female lead had to physically be strong. Like they had to act like what is our perception of a man. So they had to have a sword and they had to be tough and they had to be fierce and da-da. And I'm not saying that there isn't a place for that too. We should also have that. But I also don't want to have to apologize for a female character that is typically feminine. Like, what's wrong? What? Now we're saying that's bad? I don't, that's the wrong messaging. I don't want to say that that's bad. So for me, a big thing with the Minnie Mouse Shore is I didn't want to apologize that she was like excited about her date and that she was like nervous and she was overdoing it with the perfume. And then at the end, she's all disastrous from the dump pile. But she's taken her predicament into her own hands. Like Mickey didn't come and save her. She saved herself. And she walks into her date and she just rocks it with all that stink all over her. But she doesn't care. She just goes in and owns it. But just things like that. And even Descendants, like there was, trust me, this was half funded by the consumer products division. So there was a lot of like every 4 episodes, make them change outfits. And then over here, can the character be doing this? And there were a lot of special requests. And so for me, I was like, well, but can Evie use chemistry to make the makeup? And can Mal be a really cool artist? And so I got to have this responsibility to make girl leads be girly sometimes, but they still could be smart, or they could be funny, or they could be goofy, or they could be dumb. Why can't we have girls be dumb and messy too? We should be all of it. We are all of it. And our characters should be too. They shouldn't just be token female one holding a sword. So that was something that's been very important to me.
Yeah, that is excellent. So I think I've got we're running out of time, and I would love to keep going on and on about this. So where do I, you know, what last thing do I pull out before I have to give up on this? I still keep thinking about how far you have come from when I first met you, and can you tell us a bit about like the difference from being an animator to storyboard artist, and then from storyboard artist to directing, and then show running or producing? You know. I know each time was a big, well, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, so I think the good news is each thing I've done has helped inform the next one. And I have always had like a thirst for the next thing. I've always had to go through the, I don't think I'm good enough part of it. But I've learned to just show up anyway. That's been like a rule too. Like I'm terrified, but show up anyway. And so animation, I remember I wanted to go cry in a bathroom because I was so terrified, and I showed up anyway. I could ask for help, and I got the help. Obviously, the industry changed. I ended up in story. Storyboarding was really difficult for me at first because I spent so many years in animation, and so even to this day, my performances and my character drawings are great, but drawing a composition and perspective and a background and all that kind of stuff, it's not as strong. So I had to work on that skill set. From there, doing my shorts really helped me get a taste for the whole big picture. I liked being a part of records and casting and meeting with the composers and being in post and doing animatics and learning timing. So I really started to see that I liked the whole big picture of it all. So that basically helped me get a sense that I wanted to at least direct. And so then I had to become vocal about it, and I had to let people know how badly I wanted to direct, or nobody was going to just hand that over. So then, again, like I tell this story about when I directed on Dr. Lollipop, there was an animation timer. His name was Larry Lucklighter. He's a veteran animator. Like, he was a timer on Adventure Time. He was an old school TV animator. He can animate circles around me. And he was doing the timing direction. He came up to me one day and he asked me, like, so do you want this or do you want this? He was asking me these questions, and I was like, why is he asking me this? He knows so much more than me. And I remember I said, because you are the keeper of the vision. Like, I literally said that to myself. You are the keeper of the vision. And I've stuck with that forever. And now when I run shows, I always say to myself, remember, you are the keeper of the vision. So all the people on my crews, and Dan even said to me, his greatest advice he told me was to let my crew surprise you. So I have a crew, and they're so talented, and some of them are way more talented than I am, and they bring so much to the table. But at the end of the day, I have to remember to be the keeper of the vision. There has to be a single voice driving the whole thing. And I'm lucky that people seem to keep liking my vision on things, so I keep getting to be a keeper of the vision. And that's my favorite place to be. I really like to think of the big picture of everything. And I like to work with the studio. I actually really like to work with the studio executives and crack that whole code and figure that out and bring that down into the crew and see how we can be a unit all together. Like, all that stuff thrills me as much as the creative and just artistic side of the process.
That is so great.
Hope I answered that.
No, that's fantastic. So this is a perfect time then. You have actually raised a whole bunch of things that I want to keep asking about, but it's now time to let the audience do this.
So I just have a question, like, for anyone, in the audience who might be potentially like having kids or thinking about having kids in the future. I know you have a lot of shows that you grew up on or that influenced you. What is one show you could name? It could be yours, it could be any that you would say, this will raise your kids right, you should show them this,
Are you asking in the for learning entertainment, or are you asking in the for learning lessons about life?
Just in general, anything that you say, you need to show your kids this.
Well, I showed my kids Looney Tunes cartoons because I think that they're so funny. Some of them are not really appropriate in some ways, but I really want them to understand funny, cartoony cartoons. And so that's something that I've shared with my own kids. My son particularly loves them. And then right now I'm really into a show that just seems like a weird one to bring up, but I am really into New Girl. If you guys watch that show, it's so good. And I hadn't watched it when it came out, but I think it has the most perfectly constructed comedic storytelling with characters that you fall in love with, and it translates to animation so well that now everybody on our show is watching it, and we bring it up all the time. And I am now showing it to my kids. It's our Wednesday night show that we're watching together. I've only had them to leave the room a few times, but I really like, from that standpoint of like what is great comedic storytelling and with great characters that you fall in love with. I feel like New Girl's a really great show for that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I have been hearing a bunch just from what Brian has been talking about and the way you've been answering the stories about just how close you get to the people you're working on these projects with and how much like bouncing ideas off of them, like your trust in their storytelling ability and their trust in yours is sort of like how you make these shows work so well. And especially those are my favorite anecdotes to hear about the industry. It's why, I'm so excited about hopefully getting into it. And I was wondering, especially as a woman trying to help other women raise their voices and other, people who have maybe intersectional identities, how do you foster that? And as you're getting higher in the rankings and levels of these shows, are you doing anything differently that you think is creating an environment that is really conducive to that? Or also, like, what would you have changed when you were in these environments? Like, I know Brian said you started just shouting out your ideas, sort of showing them to everybody. Is there anything like that that you feel has really helped make these like relationships that have carried you so far?
I think there's so much in that question. It's really good to talk about. First of all, for raising voices, because I know how hard it was for me and how important it was to have champions and people that were like, I believe in you, and I believe in you so much, I'm going to take time with you. I've just tried to do that myself. So I had, especially with women and DreamWorks, everybody knew on Harvey if they wanted to do a storyboard test, if they wanted time with me, 100% of the time I'm going to say yes. So anybody could come to my office and bring their storyboards to me, and I would sit down and go over them with them. On Harvey, because I had so much upset inside myself for just some not great stories with Disney, with having everybody being represented. At the time, it's very different now. I need to say that Disney's incredible now with representation, but at the time, so I said with hiring on Harvey, I wanted it to be 50-50. I wanted to have non-binary voices represented. I wanted to have gay voices represented. So that was very important to me to bring in those voices, and we did. So that's one thing. And then now it's really listening. Like I think right now is harder than ever because we all care more than ever. We're in a time where us creators really understand our responsibility right now to do our storytelling right and to give our characters the right justice to be good examples. And so there are things that I don't know. I've been alive a long time. I have as a person who considers themselves a champion, I don't know everything. So I need to listen to the people that do know. So I really just like, there's times on our show right now where we're writing something and we ask the people in our crew to tell us how they feel about it, if they think it's right. And we also have to be careful because we don't want to treat, we have a writer on our show that's trans, and we don't want our writer to feel like, well, you're the trans representative for all trans, you're here to tell us all, like that, because she wants to be a writer with the rest of us. She wants to just create a great show too. So it really is a balance of like, listening and learning and growing. And John, when I left Disney Features, he gave me this little figurine of an angel holding a book, and he said it was to remind me to always be teachable. Mm-hmm. And so I have it on my desk to this day, and it's just like, it doesn't matter, I've worked on these shows and I'm this age and I've done all this stuff, I have to stay teachable. So I want to listen to these new voices and make sure they're teaching me something and give them a chance to do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
First off, thank you so much for coming. This was such a good talk and really informative. So I'm also hoping to get into television animation. It's why I'm studying. It's kind of the end goal in a lot of ways. And so I guess like what would you say are like the most important things to know when getting into that world, and especially when you're pitching and when you're developing your own ideas? Like, what are the kind of like most important tools you've developed or?
I think that's a great question, and I think it's twofold. One is I'm noticing something that's a little bit detrimental that and us older generation are starting to notice this, that people are coming out of school and they think it's time for them to have their own show. So there's a little bit of this like, well, I went to film school, I went to animation school, I studied this, time for you to buy my show. I should be a director by now, I should be this by now, I should be doing, we had a coordinator that started calling herself a script coordinator. Like she just started writing it on the emails, and we're like, this isn't your position, why are you writing this? And she's like, well, I'm doing a lot of things as a coordinator that's like that, so that should be my title. And we're like, this is your time to like learn and absorb. And so something's missing. There's this time period that I think coming out, it's yes, we want to know who you are. Yes, we want to see your talents. Yes, we want to hear from you. But also, really importantly, we want to see your thirst to learn. We want to see your hunger to absorb and learn the things that we learned on the job, and we're here to teach them. animation is the craft that like we love teaching and giving back. I mean, it's what it's all about, and people did it for us. So I think, you know, being a person that's like, I'm just here to learn. I really want to, you know, how did you do it? And can you show me this? And can I share my drawings with you? Being in that kind of space rather than like, I own this spot and I should be here. Like it's not helping people get to where they want to go. And then the second part of that is, I think it's really great. There are these different trends. Right now, there's a lot of people wanting to do Viz Dev, and there's a lot of like, I'm doing Viz Dev and I'm gonna look like Mary Blair. Or I'm like, there's a certain look of painting, and a lot of times we're looking at portfolios online and everybody's stuff is starting to look the same. So I've started looking at people's sketches, or I go to their Instagram because I want to see what they're doing on Post-it notes. Like there's so many really talented people out there. I want to know who you are. So if I have 5 people that I'm trying to decide between, I only have one position. Everybody's incredible. They came out of incredible schools. What is your voice? What makes you different than these other people? And I will find that in the little somebody sketching in the subway on the way home, or doing a funny drawing of what happened to them that day, and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Brilliant.
Hi, thank you so much for showcasing your work and talking with us today. I really appreciate it. Watching all the works kind of like all at one, it made me really want to just ask you, there's a lot of, correct me if I'm wrong, like it's very different in tone and animation style. I wanted to know, what did you do in like pre-pro or before? I just want to know what your method was for preparing to get all those different tones and animation styles to the way that you wanted to do. Maybe that's I don't know if that's an okay question. It's bright, so I'm going to move you.
Okay, yeah. That's a really interesting question. There's some things I've started to notice, because now I've started shows from the very beginning quite a few times. And as I'm starting another show from the beginning, I'm even kind of giggling to myself, like, oh, here's the part where you do this, here's the part where you do that. And it's not in a bad way, it's just I've learned certain things are a great way to just set it off. The process becomes different, like the style of animation and who's animating it and what your crew is like and all of that. But the components that need to happen to kick it off are the same. And you know, it just involves with creating the tone, and sometimes that is in the writing. Sometimes I do a lot of mood boards. I make like right when I start, I create reference folders. I just start filling folders like, this feels like this character, this feels like their bedroom, this feels like our world, this feels like our colors. And I mean, we're just with zombies, I had a whole folder that just had zombies' birthday party decorations, because I was like, these bright, fun colors and glitter and sparkles and all that. And so I started doing that for myself. So I need to, as the keeper of the vision, define what that vision is going to feel like. Descendants was all anthropology windows. So the anthropology is these amazing window treatments with really cool, and anthropology catalogs. And so that's where I started. So I find something like that. I set the tone for myself, and then I start figuring out what words communicate that to others. And so it starts there, and then it starts going into the storytelling. Sometimes I'll storyboard a little thing, or just do a few sketches of like, how would this person move? How do they stand? And all those little things for myself start to inform just the tone of the whole show, to where I can then start communicating it with the different people that start coming onto the show. And I always do expression sheets. Like as an EP, I'm doing the expression sheets for our show, because I'm noticing these stiff characters starting to come in. So I do them. My drawings are not perfect or clean or finished. I do these rough expressions. People seem to always love them, and then somebody else who's awesome at drawing will clean them up. But I know where my talent is. I know how to set a tone now, and so that's where I start at the beginning of a show.
Yeah, so the senior, I'm basically in like networking mode kind of, and I know partially a lot of the stuff that we were able to talk about was just having the goal to talk to a friend cipher. And there are times, like, I'm also an introvert, so it's just like, I literally feel like sometimes when I'm going after the thing, like recruitment or things like that, it's it feels so much more difficult than I think it would be in comparison to just what my drive is, because I know I have it there, but there are so many times where I just don't go forward with it. So how do you trick yourself into just doing it anyway? How do you like get yourself to believe in yourself, to just say that I am worth your time, I can be in front of you to talk about this?
So you just said the key word, trick yourself. Just play the part. It's like you show up and the psyche will follow. And, say the words that a person who did have the confidence would say. Take the action that a person who was a type A type would take. And that literally, I'm not kidding, it's the kind of stuff that I just started thinking about. Because I wanted it so badly. That's the thing, like what you're saying. I just, like, my heart was aching to do all this stuff. And it still is like that to this day. Every time I'm doing something, the next thing, I'm like, I have to do this or I'm gonna die. Like, I have to do it. So, okay, if I wanna do this thing that badly, what is the part I need to play in order to do that? I remember when I wanted to direct so very badly, and it just, God, there were no opportunities. And I got onto the show. It ended up being canceled. It was called Rapscallions. I don't know if anybody knows about this. It was after Phineas and Ferb. A bunch of Phineas and Ferb people went onto the show, and we were supposed to help it. It was greenlit, but the stories weren't figured out. So we were all brought on, and they had said to me, like, you're going to direct at some point. We really need you in the story room. We need you helping with boards and story. And I was like, oh my God, again, I'm not going to direct. So I just started saying, like, I'm a director. I'm a director. I just started saying it to myself. I'm a director. And this isn't in the way that I'm talking about where, like I said, we need to, you want to be humble and you want to learn and absorb. It was more in the way of, like, I have done the work. I've put the time in. It is my time to step into that place. And so I just started, like, instead of sitting in the back corner chair, I would sit at the center table with everyone. And instead of, like, writing down a note about something but not saying it out loud and maybe showing it to someone after the meeting, I raised my hand and said it out loud. If I had a joke idea, I said it out loud. And I literally was saying to myself, I'm going to play the part of a director. I'm going to be a director. And there was this one time where there was a lot of drama in the room and the show was canceled. They weren't going to move it forward, blah, blah, blah. And I just made a point to say some supportive words to the show creator and just said a few things. And afterwards, the head of Disney Development and Series pulled me aside and he said, you showed leadership today, and everyone noticed. And it was that kind of stuff where, like, there was another Aliki in the past that would have been so terrified to do that. But little, by playing the part and acting as if and just saying it out loud, I've started to become more and more comfortable doing it to where it feels like, yeah, that is me.
You have all this incredible experience in both film and television. What do you think the biggest difference you've seen as a creative workspace environment between those two industries? And if you were to return to film as possibly a director, how would you bring what you learned from television as a creative workspace into that space?
That's such a good question. I think feature animation's changed a lot since I was there, so it would be interesting to be back there for me at this point. I mean, it happens. There's I'm blanking on his name that came from The Simpsons, and Rich Moore. But I think that there are great things about both. And I was talking about in features, there's this incredible lineage of mentorship where there's really this, like, trainee apprenticeship, mentoring, and people are, like, groomed and brought up, and wisdom is shared, and it's just in the mentality and in the environment. It's just part of what makes it tick. And TV is so fast. There's just not as much space for that. But what I love about TV is I think the fast-paced environment helps us not be so precious with things. So you got to think quickly and move quickly and get on to the next idea. And so sometimes I think in features, it seems like things can get so belabored and overworked, or there's so much money involved, there's so many cooks in the kitchen that things can become so watered down that these initial spark of these ideas that came in just get diluted. And I think TV has a lot more chance for those things to make it onto the screen. Interestingly enough, one of my shows that has been in development and keeps being changed into a new thing, it has been so many different things. I won't even go into it. But the latest, as of a couple weeks ago, was they asked me if I want to instead do it as a Christmas special and as a long-form movie format for Disney Plus. And I was like, because I've been kind of wanting to do a longer format thing now that I've been doing TV for so long. So I think it'll be really interesting to take the foundation that I have from features, but bring everything I've learned from TV and put that into a long-form format. Let's see what happens.
Two questions. What advice would you give to newer storyboard artists who want to be in the industry, whether it is for TV or for like longer film, like feature film type stuff? And if you have seen any newer persons in the industry's portfolio, what would you say strikes you the most? Because I do remember you were talking about everyone's portfolio more or less looking the same and you looking for a specific voice, but I would appreciate if you went a bit deeper into that.
Well, for storyboarding, I think seeing certain understanding and skill set is really important. But there's so much that you can learn on the job. So I think showing examples of tests, like just taking snippets from scripts and boarding them out, or just a scenario. I remember the features test was like a Boy Scout helps a grandma across the street, like taking a scenario and storyboarding it, first this setup, then something happens, and how is it resolved? So giving yourself some setups to storyboard out little short sequences, I think is really important for showing your thinking and also your understanding for sequential storytelling. For learning, storyboarding classes are just so important because I think there's a technical part of storyboarding that you just have to learn. But there are also a lot of really great books out there now about storyboarding that have been written by, like, was it Francis Glebitz? Yeah, there's some really great boarding books out there, but there are also great filmmaking books. There are a lot of like master shots, I think it's called, cinematic books that are for creating shots, because storyboarding isn't just the drawing part of it. You have to understand shots. You have to understand how to set up shots that clearly tell a story. So learning, even from live action books, is really important to help inform. And then also, I met with a storyboard artist recently, and she told me she copied a lot of storyboards, and it actually helped her grow. I think you were talking about Glenn Keane copying old masters to understand how they drew such great drawings. And I feel like there's an argument for just copying a storyboard so you understand why that board worked the way it did. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and there would be a big difference between copying it and calling it your own and copying it just to learn.
Copying to learn, you're not going to put it in your portfolio. You're going to copy it to learn and then throw it away.
So this is the point at which we have to wrap it up, because we've got stuff we've got to do after. So at this point, I'd say thank you so much for coming out. I mean, I knew this was going to be fantastic, but I'm just continually blown away by you every time I see you or talk to you or anything like that. So thank you again. Thanks so much, Aliki, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.